Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you know, and Ranking Member knows, I have a couple of amendments I'd hope to add to the process here today. Let me start, though, by saying that I believe this legislation today will be a step in the right direction, and it comes at a critical time. We sadly are not making the progress we all wish we were making on the opioid epidemic, despite the federal government finally engaging more and acting as a partner, in this Congress in particular passing the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, which Senator Whitehouse and I co-authored, and then the cures legislation. In the last 10 days, I've been at 3 different parts of my state where they are using these grant monies very effectively to try to get people who have overdosed into treatment using some innovative new ways where you have law enforcement working with social workers, with treatment providers, to deal with one of the huge gaps we have, which is people being saved by Narcan, this miracle drug that can reverse the effects of an overdose, and then people falling between the cracks and not going to treatment, but rather going back to the same environment and overdosing again and again. It is the #1 cause of death in my state of Ohio. We're one of the states that's been hardest hit. It's actually the #1 cause of death now in America for those under age 50. It is an epidemic, and there's no question that the CARE and Cures Act are beginning to help, but we need to do more. And CARE 2.0, which Senator Whitehouse and I have introduced, we think would help quite a bit. I think, again, some of the legislation that we'll consider today will be a step in the right direction. On the 2 amendments that I'd hope to offer today, one is as it relates to the IMD exclusion. A lot of you are aware of this because you confront it, as I do back home. You go to these great residential treatment centers. They've got 16 beds because that's the limit that Medicaid will reimburse. They're ready to take on more people, and they want to take on more people. And tragically, there are many people who seek access who can't get it. And I've heard from too many families who have lost a child who was ready to go to treatment, but there was no room at the facility. And during that period of time, in one case, it was literally 7 days between the time the person was ready to go and the time the person overdosed and died, because when that person was ready, that's when the bed should have been available. The 16-bed limit makes no sense. It's arbitrary. And the IMD exclusion is something that I think is hindering our ability to really address this crisis. So we have legislation to do this. It's legislation that Senator Durbin and I introduced last year. It's pretty expensive, to be honest, and the pay-fors are hard to get. We do have a different proposal we're working on, and I appreciate the chairman and ranking member for working with us on this, that would limit some of the costs of it, but through good policy by saying that if you want to increase the cap beyond 16 beds, it could be without limit, but if you use all 3 methods of medication-assisted treatment, which I think is good policy. So methadone, Suboxone, and Vivitrol would all have to be offered in that kind of a treatment facility. That reduces the cost, frankly, the pay-for, but it also, I think, leads to better policy. And I would hope that even if we can't succeed today because of the restrictions that we had to put in place on this particular markup to be able to reach consensus and not have significant pay-fors and costs, that we can take this up on the floor, and I look forward to working with my colleagues, including the chair and ranking member, on that. I know they both agree that we need to address this issue of the IMD exclusion. The second amendment I'd hope to offer is about the STOP Act. I see many of you who are in the room today are co-sponsors. In fact, half of this committee is a co-sponsor of this legislation. We spent 18 months studying this. Claire McCaskill and I, who's here, took this up under the Permanent Subcommittee Investigations. So did Tom Carper when he succeeded her. And we did a good study, and we did a good investigation. We had 2 hearings on this, where we finally realized you've got to change the law to require the post office to try to stop this deadly fentanyl from coming into our country. And it's a very sad reality that the #1 killer in Ohio and in our country today is fentanyl. Roughly 2/3 of our deaths for overdose last year in Ohio are estimated to be from fentanyl. The new information coming out is it's being spread on everything else, from marijuana and cocaine and crystal meth to other drugs, and it's 50 times more powerful than heroin. It is inexpensive. And one reason it's inexpensive is this synthetic form of opioid is being produced overseas and shipped into our country, primarily through the U.S. mail system. Law enforcement, intelligence communities all agree with that, and they all agree, as did our investigation, as Senator Carper knows, that when we actually found a few hundred websites willing to sell fentanyl online and were able to dig down into the issue, every one that we studied said, send it by the U.S. mail, because they don't require the kind of information that allows law enforcement to identify these packages. And so our legislation is very simple. It says that we should require the post office to do what FedEx UPS, DHL, other carriers have to do under law that we all passed here 16 years ago. We think this would make a huge difference in keeping some of this poison out of our communities, and at the very least, raising the cost by reducing the supply. And again, I know there have been some concerns raised about how we did it with the post office. Senator Wyden had raised some of those, and I appreciate his concerns, and I appreciate him working with us to try to come up with a solution that can protect our kids, protect our communities, and at the same time, be sure it's done in a practical way.
Senator McCaskill.